Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast for the last time this episode and this week, talking about a hypothetical scenario that I wanted to bring up to you guys. Who is most likely to return to the playoffs, the Jaguars or the Los Angeles Chargers? After last season, two very different teams at certain points and two very similar teams the way it ended. The Chargers finished with the second worst record in the AFC at 5-12, and the Jaguars lost their last 5 of 6 games on their schedule to get kicked out of the playoffs and not make the playoffs after starting a very promising season at 8-3. Like I mentioned, they lost their last 5 of their 6 games, were knocked out of the playoffs, and it was pretty disappointing because of the offseason that they had jumping into the Jaguars side of things. They, signed Calvin Ridley. He was going to add to that wide receiver room with Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Travis Etienne as their running back. Pretty solid old line overall, but Trevor Lawrence was kind of stepping into his own, getting pushed into that upper second from the top level of quarterbacks. The top level is the Mahomes, the Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. They're at the top of the list. Lamar Jackson, they're at the top. And then Trevor Lawrence was kind of elevating himself, I thought, to that second tier of quarterbacks because they started the year so well, 8-3, and it looked like offensively Doug Peterson had him playing very well, running the ball. Trevor Lawrence looked decisive and very accurate with his throws. And then they kind of hit that bump in the road. From what I saw, it just looked like Travis Etienne got hurt, and then after that, they weren't really able to reestablish that running game that they had going early in the year, where Etienne had his best part of the season. Then he put up, like 45 rushing yards, 30-something, 60-something, and it forced Trevor to throw a little bit more, and he made some more mistakes down the line, and I think that cost them in games where you need to be able to run the ball against good defenses like they played in the Bucs, the Ravens, the Browns. They struggled in all those games. They lost all those games, and I think that cost them there in the end. And on the Chargers side of things, from the get-go, there were some moments where you saw Justin Herbert. Just looking at this roster, it's crazy to think that in some moments it looked as if this offense was playing as they should. A star wide receiver, Keenan Allen. Mike Williams gets hurt pretty badly, so he's going to be out. And then you have Austin Eckler coming off of a great season. And the oddest thing for me this past season was the performance of Austin Eckler. I know he was hurt a good amount of it, and they were being cautious with him. But to have that sort of fall off was crazy to me because he was such a big part of their offense. To not have him involved really at all, you get results like you did this past season with the Chargers. Justin Herbert, I think, was forced now to throw it more, carry the team on his back a lot more, and he delivered in some moments, but I think some of his other players let him down. I just jumped to the game they had against the Packers where he made a phenomenal throw, and I think I'm not going to remember the name of their first-round receiver right now. It just slipped my mind, the name of him. The wide receiver from TCU, their first-round pick. He made a great throw to him, and he just dropped the ball, and they ended up losing that game. And then, throwing the ball so much could come at a risk, and he got hurt because of it. He hurt his hand, and after that, I think he was never really the same. They just ended their season with a very bad taste in their mouth. Brandon Staley was always in the news, it seemed, answering questions about, the morale of this team. Where do you go with them playing like this? The defense wasn't really great at all at some points, regardless of all the stars that they had. Derwin James, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack was up there in the sack race. They were just missing other pieces there. Their corners aren't really anything great. It's not Kenneth Walker. I was about to say Kenneth Walker as their linebacker. Kenneth Murray, their linebacker from Oklahoma. He's solid, but I think you need a lot more than just those guys that need more interior pressure on the defensive tackle side. So all those things kind of culminated into them having the season that they did. Teams were able to run the ball all over them. Just they really stood up to nobody when they were sort of punched in the mouth by other teams' offenses, and they weren't able to respond because all their players almost got hurt. Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, and then you only really had Keenan Allen, but people can take him away by doubling him, tripling him if they have to, and then you have to rely on these other guys who clearly weren't ready for the moment. And the Chargers, now I think we go into a spot with both of these teams where they head into this offseason in similar situations because they have the quarterback, they have some weapons there that are X factor kind of weapons, number one receivers, number one running backs, and both of these teams are really missing that defense. And now they're kind of sort of even on the coaching level because Doug Peterson was definitely a better hire than Brandon Staley. The stats, the results speak for themselves. He's still there, and he's a Super Bowl winning coach, has that experience. But now the Chargers bring in Jim Harbaugh from Michigan, very successful season at Michigan. They won the national championship, and he's had also prior success in the NFL with the 49ers most recently, going to that Super Bowl playing against his brother. He was able to lead that organization, that 49ers organization, into some very good, successful years. Up until now, Kyle Shanahan has arrived there, and now they're kind of back to that. But in between there, it wasn't looking too hot for the 49ers. And I think he's going to do great for the Chargers. And it's going to definitely help Justin Herbert a lot because of his experience, like I mentioned, in the NFL and playing for the Chargers, being a quarterback as well. That sort of relationship, it's hard to find anywhere else. And I think with Brandon Staley, he was never really able to tap into that full potential that Justin Herbert has because I believe he can be up there with the Mahomes, with the Joe Burrows, those caliber guys, Josh Allen, if he had a coach to really push him to do that, really tap into his full potential. I have full confidence in Jim Harbaugh to do that. And now these teams are very parallel in where they're at in their, growth process. Good coaches, in my opinion, solid offensive pieces, great quarterbacks. They're both missing that defensive side of the ball. The Jaguars have decent pieces like Trayvon Walker. Devin Lloyd is a good pickup, I thought, drafting him. Josh Allen, the Jaguars have to make sure they tag him at least if they're not able to extend them because of the kind of season that he had. And their D-line is great, but then you get up to those further levels up the field, and it's starting to look a bit bare, if you would, with their corners, their safeties, and up to that level. Same with the Chargers. It's very interesting, these similarities that they have. And on top of all the similarities that I listed, the question is who's most likely to return to the playoffs. It's funny that the last time these two teams were in the playoffs, they played against each other back in 2021 in the wild card round. The Chargers actually had a lead, 27-7 at halftime, and I'm sure most of you know how it ended. The Chargers only scored 3 points in the second half compared to the Jaguars' 24, and they completed the comeback and eliminated the Chargers. A lot of people felt that Brandon Staley was going to be fired after that. I probably was one of those people. Because after you have a result like that, it's hard for the organization to push you for a whole other season and have that much confidence in you. And, he got fired this season. And in that game, the coaching and the wherewithal from really the coaching was what stood out because Doug Peterson never wavered, was never really rattled by it, knew there was a whole other half of football. I think he kind of gave his energy, his calmness out to the rest of the team, and they were able to go out there with confidence that they were still in this game, and it showed. Brandon Staley, never really been there, inexperienced coach at that, crumbled in that moment, for a lack of a better term, and it showed. And now the Chargers and Jags find themselves trying to recover after a pretty bad season this past season, not coming close to the playoffs, at least for the Chargers. And if I were to pick, finally, which of these teams I think has a better chance of making the playoffs, I would probably go with the Chargers because we know what we're going to get out of Doug Peterson, most likely, and Trevor Lawrence. They could only get better, I think, because they showed that potential, but it just died off. I think it's a lot easier to withstand that potential after another season under your belt, building on it, acknowledging those mistakes, and getting better after that. Not to mention they're in an easier division by default because they don't have Patrick Mahomes in it. And the Chargers are in a tougher division, like I mentioned there. And I have confidence in Jim Harbaugh to have success there, but he has a lot of things to iron out because the Chargers are in a difficult situation with their cap space and stuff like that and all their stars because they're over the cap limit and they might have to make some big decisions on a Joey Bosa, a Khalil Mack, Keenan Allen, these sort of stars that have a big cap hit of like 30 to something, $40 million in cap hit. They're going to have to make some decisions, iron out some things before I really believe that Jim Harbaugh can establish himself there with his way of playing football, his true identity. I think he's going to build up that defense a lot more, make them better than they already are, or at least tap into that potential that Joey Bosa, Derwin James can really tap into, even Kenneth Murray as well. Khalil Mack's a little bit older. Just off the top of my head, I think he'd be one that they try to restructure his deal or potentially release him and, get his contract off and have him be a cap casualty because of it. But we'll see where that goes. I think Jim Harbaugh has a longer list of to-dos than Doug Peterson does because he's already taken over that team, molding it into what he wants it to be. And they're just further along in the process because, Jim Harbaugh is just stepping back into this organization. I do expect him to be better, a lot better with Jim Harbaugh. But comparing the two, I think the Jaguars will make it better. Easier division, easier path to the playoffs and returning to that spot. How far they'll go, that's up to you guys to decide. But answering that question, I think the Jaguars are much suited to have that success in the coming season than the Jaguars. But again, let me know what you guys think. And, is there other factors that play into the equation? Do you think Jim Harbaugh is going to come in and just have success right away? Do you think the Jaguars are going to maybe fall off after last year? Last year could have been an anomaly of sorts. If you believe that, let me know what you guys think. I'm always interested with your engagement. But that will do it for this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode. At whatever point you did, watch the whole thing or just bits and pieces of it. Your engagement and following and likes also mean a lot, so please make sure to follow and like the show. And again, please subscribe to it as well and comment on the show, as well as following us on any other social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, for more content on not only just football and sports, but there's a whole other boatload of things that the podcast network provides. So make sure to check that out on other platforms. For more of this NFL, football, and general content, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel where I post YouTube shorts. Each of these individual segments has their own video on just the topics I talked about today. If you would as well, like and follow those. But for now, I've been your host, Manny Maradiaga. Again, saying thank you and wishing you guys an awesome weekend. What better way to start it than watching this episode of the GSMC Football Podcast? So take care, and I will see you guys all on Monday. Let's go.
wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go.